Well, hello there, my friends. This is Garrett J White, the founder of Wake Up Warrior, and also your host here in the inaugural episode of Warrior Wealth. Now, I'm not going to bullshit with you here. I have been waiting a very long time to get back on the mic to talk about the topics of money. What you might not know coming into this show is that money was the topic that actually started me down the path as a producer at all. I was not raised with money. I didn't have any money whatsoever. I mean, my parents gave me $50 a year for school clothes. Now, this might be, more, maybe it's less than what you got. My folks didn't have money. Like, my parents were not entrepreneurs. They were not raised with cash falling from the trees. They didn't have any drive to produce financial prosperity. But what my parents did give me was work ethic. My mom and dad gave me a commitment to work my ass off. My mom told me, if you want it, go fucking get it. Hence the phrase across all of the warrior movement, this topic and this idea of DTF. Do the fucking work. Why? Because the only way that you and I are going to actually create inside of our lives something better is to actually be willing to do the work. Well, I wanted more in the topic of money. From the very first time that I saw, I don't remember his name. He was a guy I played football with in high school. His dad was a doctor. And as a doctor, they had a little bit more money than us, actually significantly more money than us. And so I figured you had to be a doctor, but I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor, so I never went down that path. And so I went down this idea of like, hey, my gateway to being able to be successful in this game is to become a doctor. And so that was my path, at least I thought. We'll get to why that didn't work out so well here in a moment. But the coolest part about what went on with seeing my friend's dad as a doctor was they had a pool with lights that changed colors, and we would go there with the girls from the football team. The girls that were hanging out with us on the football team, we would go to the pool and we'd swim at night. The girls would be there. I would be all impressed. I would be like all about trying to, hook up with one of the girls or connect with one of them, but I couldn't because, well, I was the guy who didn't have a swimming pool. And then I would go back to our double wide that we were raised in, and I would have this desire for wealth, but I had no idea how to get there. And so I determined that money itself as a gateway was something that I would pursue in sports. Now, as you're listening to this show, if you have never had any contact whatsoever with Wake Up Warrior, well, this is going to come a little bit maybe as a new wave shock, but for the rest of you, for the hundreds of thousands of you that follow the Wake Up Warrior movement, you get exactly what I'm talking about. We're talking about body, being, balance, and business. We're talking about the topic of getting paid to make money, keep money, and grow money. And the challenge that most of us have as men, not only was it that we were sedated as men and taught to not believe in ourselves as men, but the one thing that we were taught was that the value inside of a man comes down to his ability to produce. And while you hear me talk about this over and over again, this idea that you and I as men are required to become multidimensional men, that our fitness and our fuel inside of our body, that our meditation, our memoirs inside of our being and our connection to God and purpose, that our relationship with the queen, our wife and our children, and that our businesses and our bank accounts, that this is part of our responsibility. It is our stewardship to create and live the have-it-all lifestyle. Here is the fact, though. The fact is, without money, the game itself slowly fucking fades away. Money itself buys opportunity. Having resource creates opportunity for you that otherwise you couldn't have. You can't have the same opportunity with great fitness. You can't have the same opportunity with a great spiritual connection. You can't have the same opportunity even with a great marriage and a great relationship with your children. One of the things that you have to come to grips with is that money actually matters. And I was starting to get a clue to this as a young man in high school, as a football player with my buddy whose dad was a doctor with a swimming pool with the fucking lights, and the fact that it equaled getting what you wanted, which for most young men is a girl and, well, attention. So that path continued. I thought the football was going to be the game. Football didn't work out for me. Played in college, played in the arena leagues, got injured, got cancer, game was over, and I ended up finding myself as a PE teacher and a football coach. And I was standing on the sidelines on a Thursday afternoon, heading into homecoming week, If you're familiar with football, then you'll get this. Heading into homecoming week, I was a coach on the defensive side of the ball. And it was a Friday or Thursday night, and we're doing the walkthroughs. If you're familiar with the football routine, that means that everybody's wearing helmets, and they're wearing jerseys and shorts and their cleats, and they're getting ready. And the grass was cut, and the field was painted, and the cheerleaders were out doing their deal, getting ready. And homecoming was a big deal. We were a ranked team at the time. This was a big game, but I wasn't a player anymore. I was a coach. And sitting inside of the coach's box, I stood on the sideline with my arms crossed, with my whistle around my neck, looking out on the field, my visor down low, my sunglasses tucked up underneath my visor. I was divorced. I had a son, an estranged son, in which now I have a relationship with, Parker, but I didn't have a relationship with him then. His mother had gone off and got remarried again. Good for her. And I was there, this guy, trying to figure shit out, making $1,200 a month as a PE teacher and a football coach. And I stood there with all of this fire and this intensity, and I was left with a question. And the question was simple. The question was, is this what I was born to do? Now, it's crazy. It's crazy how questions begin to change a man. How questions change the way you see money. How questions change and challenge the way you see God. How questions challenge and change the way that you see marriage and sex, the way that you see drugs, the way that you see alcohol, the way that you see the way you do fitness. Like everything inside of your world opens up and becomes something new when you have the courage to allow questions to enter your mind. And so questions did. And the question that day on that field, on that sideline, that came out of nowhere was this: is this all you were born to do? 3 days later, I get a book. The book is Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Now, I'm young. I'm a young man. I'm 23, 24 years old. I get this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and I will be grateful till the day I die that Robert Kiyosaki not only wrote the fucking book, but that he marketed his ass off and sold me the book, and that I would go on a journey for 2.5 years of pretty much consuming anything and everything that this man put out. He changed my life. That book itself challenged me. It divided the world that I knew into these two places of the rich and the poor. He divided into the employee and the entrepreneur. It divided up between those who run businesses and invest and those who are employed by businesses and who divest. Like there was this clear distinction that opened up in my mind and in my heart and in my soul over those next couple of days as I read this book. Now, what you might be impressed to know was I had not read many books in my entire life. Reading books was not my thing. Like, it's just not what I did. I read 5 books by the time I graduated from high school with a degree in secondary education. And yet here I was, and I was having this experience, reading these books by Robert Kiyosaki, and I made a decision. And some of you listening to this podcast may be that version of Rich Dad, Poor Dad for you. As you tune in every single week, as I discuss the topics of making money, keeping money, and growing money, under the frame of what we call power, production, profit, and protection. As I discuss and I share with you the insights that have allowed me to take businesses from 0 to 30 million, that have allowed me to invest and build lives and multiple organizations, employ hundreds of individuals, and ultimately begin to understand not just the rise, but the fall that I took in 2008, losing everything, and the awareness that I came to from that loss of who I would have to become as a businessman and an investor to begin to ultimately create a life again, but this time with the stability and the foundation to not lose it. I was not interested in losing it again, and we'll get to that here more in just a second. And so I read this book, and a friend of mine was in the mortgage industry, and he said, hey, why don't you come check out mortgages? I didn't know anything about mortgages. I had no idea what a loan was. You know, I was, at that time, I was stressed out about some pretty intense things. You want to know what they were? Here they were. Here was intense thing number one. Intense thing number one I was stressed out about was committing to a $19.95 a month cell phone contract with a company called Cricket. Number two, I was stressed out about, there was a gym that was like a Lifetime Fitness, And the gym membership was $19.99 a month. That's a total of $40, just under $40 with tax over $4. $40 commitment on a monthly basis, and I was sweating balls over trying to make this decision. Like, I did not have money. And I knew nothing about investing, knew nothing outside of what I'd read inside the book. I mean, it was so intense that I sat down with an accountant for the very first time about a year after reading the book. And I'm sitting with the accountant. He's going through an income and a balance sheet with me. Income statement and a balance sheet, right? Profit and loss statements, equity, debt. He's going through the thing with me, and he's sharing it. And I pause him and I ask him a question. The question was really simple. I said, dude, do you read the books by Robert Kiyosaki also? Specifically a book called Cash Flow Quadrant. He looks at me and he's like, no. And I was like, what? And my mind was perplexed because to me, the PE teacher, the kid who came from the double wide, the guy who'd never had any money in his whole life, who was literally stressing out about a cell phone contract and a gym membership and whether or not I could sustain that kind of commitment for 12 months. Obviously, I couldn't sustain marriage because I was divorced at that time also. And I'm sitting there thinking in my mind that this individual, this accountant, was actually using something that Robert Kiyosaki had created, which was an income statement and a balance sheet, not recognizing that literally this shit had been around forever. Like, this was accounting forever, but he was the first one to teach me, and so I was convinced that he was the one that had created it. I'm sitting there and I don't understand shit. I don't understand what assets are. I don't understand what liabilities are. I don't understand what income is. I don't understand what expenses are. Like, I don't understand money, and I had played under a place that maybe is familiar to you, which is this idea that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know, the fun thing is that there's only two kinds of people that say money doesn't matter. Do you know what those two people are? Two people that say this. One are people who've never made it, and two are people who inherited it and never had to work for it. Outside of that, every other human being on the planet that is a producer, every man that I've ever met that produces as a businessman will not disrespect the topic of money. They may tell you that it is not the only thing, which I agree with. They may tell you that money itself will not buy you happiness, which I will agree with. They may tell you that money itself could corrupt a person, which I would agree with. But here is what I'm going to tell you. Money itself does not make a person anything. Money itself magnifies a man to himself. Let me repeat that. Money itself does not make a man. Money magnifies a man to himself. It is a mirror. Money is a mirror that shows you two things. One, it shows you the value that you create or the lack thereof in the marketplace. Number two, it demonstrates the value inside of how you see yourself. And now people are going to get fired up about this. They're going to be like, Garrett, you're an asshole. How dare you say that a man's value comes down to his money? I didn't say that. What I am saying is that you can tell what a man values by the results that he has, by the phrase, by their fruit ye shall know them, which was a phrase my mother used with me my whole life growing up. By their fruit ye shall know them. What fruit do you see, young man? And I would look at my fruit, and if it wasn't what I wanted, my mom said, then do something about it. Hence the birth of the statement, do the fucking work. So money matters. But money is experienced from a very different place. I ended up into the mortgage industry, and for the next 7 years inside the mortgage industry, I would build an empire. I would go from a kid who knew nothing about money to employing hundreds of individuals and building an empire in construction, building an empire in mortgage brokering, in insurance. I would build an empire for myself and hit levels of financial prosperity that I had never imagined possible. In the fall of 2007, I ended up, let's back this up. In the summer of 2007, I'm at the Mortgage Planner Summit in Las Vegas, Nevada. I brought my top mortgage planners with me, 2,000 plus individuals, me and Tony Robbins sharing the stage, which I get to do now quite a bit. Every year pretty much now I get to speak at, and he and I speak at the same event, and I set the event for him. meaning I'm the speaker that warms everybody up for an hour to an hour and a half before Tony comes out and melts the fucking building for 6 hours. And I love it, and I appreciate the opportunity. But back there I was in 2007, sharing the stage with Tony back then, almost a decade ago. This event was like the culmination of everything I had ever worked for. I was being acknowledged by my peers. My organizations were on fire. Economically, we were dominating. It appeared that there was no end to what was coming. Now, if we rewind to 2006, I sat on a boat in Bear Lake, Utah, by our cabin. And I was on a boat with a man by the name of Mark Eldridge. And Mark Eldridge was a real estate investor. He was a home builder. And Mark was also dying. And he was sitting out on the boat with me, and he had some oxygen in his nose at the time. And Mark was in his 50s, and Mark, I looked to him as kind of a mentor, and he looked at me and he said, if I can give you some advice, I said, what's that? And he said 2 things. 1, spend more time with your family. And 2, sell everything you have and go to cash. This was 2006. Now, of course, I didn't listen to either of those things. I didn't listen to the spend more time with your family. I just figured, well, you know what? This guy, he's dying. I can see what he's saying. I'm not dying. Even though I'd had cancer before, for some reason, I was not fucking listening. The second piece I saw on this was, he said, sell all your real estate. And I was like, dude, come on. Like, everything goes up. The game will never end. This was the space and place that my friend and all of our partners were coming from. We were young. We were stupid. We were in our 20s, mid to late 20s to early 30s. We knew nothing. And what Mark had lived through was not only the reality of his death being imminent, trying to give me counsel, but of course I couldn't fucking hear. I wouldn't listen. My brain was shut down. I was not interested in what Mark had to say. I was an arrogant prick. Young and had never lost before. You want to know who you should be worried about taking financial advice from? Is individuals who have never built and lost and built again. Like, literally, you can't trust a person who talks to you about money who's never had to rebuild shit. Do you want to know why? Because there's no healthy respect for money from that person, because they only live in a world in which they have won. Hence, they play from a space with no consideration for long-term protection and long-term growth and the ability to actually sustain the game that they're in, and they don't know how they're going to operate. In our high school team, we got to the playoffs, my junior year in high school, state of Washington. I went to Eisenhower High School. We get to the playoffs. We win in the regular season and beat a team called Kennewick. We had never beat Kennewick in fucking 20 years or something. We beat Kennewick at home. We go to the playoffs. Kennewick comes to our home court. They come to our high school in the playoffs, second round of the playoffs, and we lose 17-14 on a muddy fucking field in the pure rain and snow. They go on to the playoffs. They continue on. Our season is over. And I often think back to that. I'm like, you know what happened to us that year is that we were undefeated. Like, we didn't have a loss. As a team, we had never been behind. We didn't know what it felt like to actually be behind. We would get up on people, and it was go time. That's it. Like, our offense and our defense, like, we did not know what it was to come from behind the entire season. And there we were, and the pressure was on. And it wasn't that they were better than us. It's that we were killing ourselves. We didn't have any wisdom or knowledge as a team on how to play under pressure. Now, the same thing that went for us as a team is the same thing that goes on with individuals I see in the ocean. Now, I started surfing last year. 7 months ago, 6 months ago, first time I've ever surfed. I'm having a blast. I'm loving it. 2.5 months ago, I almost drowned. I'd never been out in the break that big. It was hollow. The waves were hollow. It was deep. I hadn't surfed in deep water before. It was in Huntington Beach, right off the pier. My leash broke on my board. I'd been out in the water for over an hour. Like, I did all this fucking stupid shit. Was surfing by myself in a particular location. Should have been over with everybody else. Lost my board, was paddling out for too long. I was too tired. I was feeling fatigued, but I was ignorant. So when my leash breaks and my board floats to the beach and I'm sitting there being pounded by wave after sets are rolling in and I'm getting held down for 5-6 seconds, which to you may not seem like a big deal. Sit here and hold your breath 5-6 seconds, no problem. Put yourself out fatigued and tired because of the current and paddling and paddling and paddling and no board to hold on to and you're in 20-foot deep water. And each wave is coming in about every 4 to 6 seconds, which means you're being held down just in time to come up for another fucking wave to smash you on the head and pull you under again. And you are just into surfing for 4 months, 3 to 4 months. And what you have is a formula for fucking failure. Now, I've been out in way sketchier water now, but I have learned from the experience of nearly drowning. Lifeguards were coming out. I yelled out to the pier for help because I was blacking out. I had never had an experience like this in my entire life. And this is the challenge of listening to young men in their 20s talk about money. This is the challenge of listening to someone who's never built anything and lost anything, or listening to a surfer who has no respect for the ocean because they've never been taken. When I told this tale of my surfing experience to pros and to veterans in the water, they're like, oh yeah, welcome to surfing. And that won't be your last time. The only thing that's got to happen is you just got to get smarter. And I was like, got it. Well, this same thing happened with money, and I was not a smart young man. So fast forward again, 2007, in the summer, I'm speaking at the Mortgage Planners Summit. I do the Ironman World Championships in October of 2007. By December of 2007, my entire world as I knew it was beginning to unravel. By midnight, New Year's Eve, heading into New Year's Day, my wife turns to me with tears pouring down her cheeks, the moon shining through the shutters in our big-ass house, and she looks at me and says, I didn't sign up for this. Fix it. I had no idea what was happening. I had no idea how quickly everything I built was about to unravel. I had no idea how quickly not only was my economic world going to be exposed, but I had no idea how quickly my marriage and my entire life was going to be exposed. See, I was a PE teacher. I was a PE teacher and a football player at the core who happened to be aggressive in his talk and was willing to take big risks, who could sell, who could speak, who could inspire and lead. And I had a small army of young guys who could pitch what the banks told us to pitch. 99% of those men have never recovered. I see those men today, overweight, unhappy, stressed out, talking about how they used to make big money. And you're like, dude, you realize that was a fucking decade ago. And I get it, because that loss, letting go of hundreds of employees, losing millions of dollars, putting myself to a place that I couldn't pay the fucking bills, that my wife was selling shit out of our basement, including my Ironman World Championship 2007 bike, a $12,000 bike, selling it for $1,000, $1,500 out the door with the zip wheel sets, etc., all of it, so that we could have groceries, because I was falling apart. Just like I had fallen apart in the water when I thought I was going to drown. And I started screaming out for help over to the men on the pier to send the lifeguards, and the sirens started coming and people started coming down into the water to try to save me. I thank God that I'm alive, both economically and in my marriage and across the board with the Habitable lifestyle. But I went on a journey to go find some answers. And those answers exposed, just like in my surfing experience, exposed the weakness in my psychology. They exposed the weakness in my methodology and the way that I thought about things. It exposed the way that I had operated as a man, in the way that I had taken a stand in business. This show is about how I rebuilt the empire and went even bigger. This show is about how I found access to a very simple conversation of 4 distinct ideas that all revolve around these 3 principles: get the money, keep the money, and grow the money. But how they back up into, first, power. See, one of the things that I didn't have as a businessman back in the day when shit started to go sideways, I did not have the capacity as a man, as a business leader, as an investor. I did not have the capacity to actually lead my teams in the middle of that chaos, and so I folded. I lacked the power necessary to actually build a movement out of the chaos. So one of the number one reasons why men will fuck up the game of business, they will fuck up the game of investing, they will fuck up the game of money, is not because they don't have the tactics of what to do. It's not because they don't have the understanding of what is required to be done. This is not the problem. What becomes a problem is that they lack the power daily, weekly, and monthly to do what must be done when it comes to money. There are more men sitting in scarcity and poverty and sitting in the pretender game of production for one single reason, and none of it has to do with the fact that they don't know what to do. It is the same reason why we have an obesity epidemic hitting the United States of America, and yet we have more education on our bodies than we've ever had before, and yet more people overweight than ever before. The problem is not that people don't know what to fucking do or they're big boned. The problem is a capacity issue. Men are not doing what they know they must do. And so our first week every month inside of this podcast is going to be dedicated to accessing power as a producer. How do I actually gain power? We're going to discuss this through an ideology and through a methodology called the Warrior's Way. If you're unaware of what this is, you may check it out by heading to warriorbook.com. Pick the book up because it will support you in understanding the psychology around the have-it-all lifestyle. The Warrior's Way is the foundational pivot from the code to the core to the keys to the game, and married up with a tool called the stack to daily power for a man and a business owner and an investor to produce at the level that they know they need to produce. Now, we shift this conversation to what's going to happen in week number 2. In week number 2, we're going to now dive into production. And we're going to discuss what and who is the number one investment or asset in your world. While we look at the power topic in week 1 is going to be looking at the asset of you. When we come into the second week every single week, we're going to go into production. And we're going to have conversations around the investment being in your business. That while you in your power are your number one asset, the second week we're going to discuss is why inside of your world that the number one investment is not some vehicle or tool in the stock market, that the game that we're ultimately looking at is the investment in you and your business. That the business of you when it comes to your mindsets and skill sets inside of marketing, sales, systems, leadership, and sequencing of technology, that your ability as a man in week number 2 to take the power from week number 1 to link it up to the game of production and the number one investment in week number 2 sets us up to actually have the conversation in week number 3. And so week number 3, we're going to move into profit. And I'm going to talk about the actual money. How do we grow the money that we made in week number 2 in production? In week number 1, we found the power. In week number 2, we found production. In week number 1, we identified that you were your number one asset. In week number 2, we identified that your business and the business of you, the business you run, is the number one investment that you could ever make. And in week number 3, we're going to talk about profit. We're going to talk about growing the money inside of the game of building better sequences, systems, teams, and accounting. And so we're going to continue this path. This path itself is not going to be complicated. It's not going to be complicated. It's going to be simple. Week 1, work on power. Week 2, access production. Week 3, focus on the profits. And week number 4, protection, which is your ability to keep the money. Profit may be your ability to grow the money, but protection demands that you actually keep it. Protection is going to be a whole nother conversation in which we're going to discuss the vault. We're going to talk about the king's vault. We're going to talk about the queen's vault. We're going to talk about the kingdom vault. We're going to talk about how to keep the money and how to store and stockpile cash at the core of your business and your life, just like Apple does in what I call the Apple factor. Now, this show has the power to do a lot of things for you. The most important one is to help you see the world from a different place, and from that place to begin to do things differently than you've been doing them so far. Money matters. Warrior wealth is the ability for a man to not only access power, but to be able to take that power and translate that into production. To take that production and retain and maintain profits. And then from those profits to protect the profits and to keep large quantities of cash sitting at the core of his investing and business life. I cannot promise you every single week that this show itself is going to come at you in a G-rated way. What I can promise you is that every week that you subscribe, we will be focused in order and on that sequence. Week number 1 on power, week number 2 on production, week number 3 on profit, and week number 4 on protection. And then we will roll right back and we will talk about it. I will come at you with stories, principles, examples, case studies, and actionable items that you can take forward into this game called Living the Warrior's Way in a Productive Way. Now, my final thought here for today's show. If you have not gotten access to the other podcasts that we're running, particularly Warrior on Fire, Warrior on Fire, the podcast, is going to be a daily game that will start to bring you into a daily understanding of this Warrior's Way concept and principle. Okay? Get yourself subscribed. Okay? Second piece with this. If you're not currently studying the Warrior Book, get to warriorbook.com. Go pick up a copy of the book so that as I discuss the power quotient here, and we discuss the principles of you being your number one asset, your investment being your business being your number one investment, and building vaults at the core of your empire being the number one strategy that you could live on a daily basis. When we discuss power linked up to production, linked up to profit, linked up to protection, that when I go through these frames every single week, you have access to a language that will allow you to get access to the deeper truths inside of this show in ways that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. My friends, it's my honor and it is my privilege to be here with you in this pilot episode as I kind of outline the game. Let me finish with the final story. In 2008, I had lost everything. Continuing into 2009 and 10, my marriage would be exposed. In 2011, I would find myself in the darkest place I had ever been. And in that place, there was simply a request from this voice inside of me. And it said, "Are you ready to surrender?" Inside of that surrender, I found power. I found power that increased and led to deeper levels of production than I could have ever imagined. That led to the opportunity to garnish profits in my businesses and in my life. That made me not only appreciate the game again as a businessman, but also create a life for my family that I could have never imagined. Bigger than I could have ever dreamed of. Long past the days of pools with cool, pretty lights like I saw in high school. I've also watched literally thousands of men just like you plug into the Wake Up Warrior movement and begin a journey down that same path. The final piece is profits. To know that my kingdom is established. That I can make the moves that I make in business and around my life, and yet my queen and my home is sacredly protected. Protected by me as a man because I'm in power. Protected by me as a man because I'm on purpose. Protected by me as a man because I have made the moves as a businessman and investor that I will guide you through and teach you on here on this show to set up moats and walls around my kingdom and a vault and a series of vaults, I call the 3 vaults at the core, to protect it. So that regardless of the fucking chaos or change of industries and society, that when the day's over, I can return from war as a businessman back to my home with a wife who loves me, children who love me, a marriage and a family that works, bank accounts that support that, vaults that protect it, and a vision and a purpose that inspires me to wake up every day. My brothers, welcome to this podcast series, and it's my honor to take you down the rabbit hole I call Warrior Wealth.